Okay, good morning and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Mike Deal here in central office with the Division of Drinking and Groundwaters. We're going to present today about the new revisions to the laboratory analysis and reporting rules. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Just a reminder that any questions that you have during the presentation can be sent via the chat function in WebEx. You should see a couple messages from me this morning in that chat box. As they come up, go ahead and send them in. I probably won't be able to address them to the end of the presentation, just going to get through the slides, and then we'll kind of take a pause at the end and address hopefully all the questions that come in. Also, the slides and a recording of today's webinar will be available online probably next week. If there's staff that was unable to attend, they can watch the webinar after the fact, and then the slides will also be emailed out to any attendees today for your reference. So for that question and answer period, kind of at the end of our presentation today, we do have some personnel on hand from the compliance assurance section here in central office, as well as our information management section here to answer questions about EDWR. So if you have questions, feel free to send them in at any time. We'll get to them kind of in the order that they were received at the end. So with that, we'll go ahead and kind of get into the material. Hopefully this information today isn't completely new to the labs and public water system labs. We've been trying to do a decent amount of outreach around these revisions and, approaching this October 1st effective date of some of the changes. There's a couple documents floating around out there on our website that were linked on the registration email. There's a fact sheet on the rule change and then a new update to our reporting tips document. So those are really kind of your reference material, maybe along with these slides for the changes. We hope that these changes do simplify reporting deadlines and make things, with this webinar today, we hope to make things clear. And so, as we get into material, we'll try to cover everything, revolving around the revisions, along with some extra information and kind of tips and hints around reporting drinking water data to Ohio EPA. So just a quick rundown of what we're going to cover today. We'll start with kind of a brief history and overview of Ohio Administrative Code 3745-8908, which is the analysis and reporting rule. We'll get into some of the exceptions, what isn't included in these reporting requirements. We'll touch on some requirements of subcontracting and their reporting and how that relationship will work with some of the new timelines. And then I'll try to break it down just really a timeline as simply as possible on how reporting should work based on receipt of samples, analysis completion, and then final reporting to the PWS and Ohio EPA. We'll touch on some tips on EDWR. We're not going to get into a whole demo on that today, but we will hit some of the kind of updated tips and things that have kind of been happening with EDWR. We'll have a rundown of new things with the sample monitoring point IDs and kind of some background basics, as well as some of the new things with the lead and copper SMP IDs. And then at the end of the presentation, I am going to go out to our website and kind of point and show people on the line where some of this information is available on the web. Okay, I really wanted to start today with just a rundown on why we have reporting deadlines. It may seem simple. And really the simple answer is because we have to draw the line somewhere on when these results need to be reported. but there are real, tangible, real-world reasons why we need deadlines for drinking water reports. You know, one of the most basic ones is that sample results, depending on where that level is, can trigger requirements for the public water system. So getting that information to the water system and to Ohio EPA timely is really important. If it's delayed, that can cut into the time that water system has to submit additional requirements. We then have, you know, the example that comes up from time to time where monitoring violations can be issued incorrectly based on late reports. You know, our database and how we run compliance on monitoring is really based on what is required and what's received. And we have to run that compliance check at a certain point in time after the monitoring period. And if we don't have sample results, we don't know that the water system sampled. That can cause a whole bunch of extra paperwork, violations, and rescissions to violations, and really creates a headache for the water system client, potentially for the lab, and also for our staff. I would say probably the most important to a lot of people right now is the next one, the public right to know. And this is obviously drinking water quality and contamination in drinking water is really in the public eye right now. It has been for the last couple of years, more than usual. And, you know, if I can get on my soapbox a little bit and say, you know, everything now is expected, information is expected right away. We want to have quality analysis done and proper, you know, vetting of the results and quality control, but then it becomes, you know, adamant that those results are immediately reported, and that's really what the public expects. And I have up there including non-DTEX, and that was really, you know, fundamental to House Bill 512 dealing with lead in drinking water, that the legislature really wanted to emphasize that it's as important, somewhat, to let a consumer know that they don't have lead or they don't have contamination in their drinking water, kind of an all-clear signal. So, you know, that's why the next day reporting for lead was brought forth, and then just in general, this is a new expectation. Kind of a specific example for seasonal public water systems, these can be campgrounds or other seasonal businesses. They really need those sample results. They need to have a total coliform negative safe sample in order to open their business for the year. So, you know, once again, this reporting and this next day reporting for some of these things is really important. Next one really isn't to do with the submission of the sample results, but has to do with notification of the public water system in Ohio EPA when there's an issue with an analysis. This can provide, this is done timely, this can provide the water system with additional time within the monitoring period to collect a resample. So this goes back to that, you know, it's important to notify, not only report the results, but notify of any problems as soon as possible. Okay, so really I'm just going to touch on some background a little bit on the Rule 8908, analysis and reporting. You know, the initial effective date was in 1995. It was a different world then, different rules for reporting initially. We didn't have electronic reporting then, so some of these deadlines were created then, you know, with a whole different set of standards in mind. The rule covers who the results should be reported to, what and when those results should be reported, and then how those results are reported to Ohio EPA. Previous versions of the rule required different reporting deadlines for chemical and microbiological analyses, and that's, you know, there was differences based on collection date versus receipt and the lab date, and how that, triggered the deadlines. With this rule change, rule revision, we really tried to modernize and also synchronize those reporting deadlines to make it same across the board. It's not a next day requirement. It has the same reporting deadline. A couple other points that were brought into this rule. 2016, we had the Ohio harmful algal bloom rules, which added reporting deadlines for the cyanotoxins. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Ohio House Bill 512, also in 2016, placed these direct requirements for lead and copper samples actually into state law, into statute, which were then later adopted in our rule. There's now kind of two parts of 8908. There's the analysis deadline and the reporting deadline, so I'm going to split it out here and really just start here with a real basic explanation of what these deadlines are. For the analysis side, the rule now requires analysis, including QC, to be completed within 30 business days of the receipt of the sample by the lab. Works out to around 6 weeks or so if you do the math with the 30 business days. Now there are, I guess, exceptions to this. If there is a hold time in method or rule that is shorter than that, that would obviously have to be followed. The 30 business days is the maximum time allowed to complete the analysis. We did extend that to 60 days for radiologicals based on the longer hold times in that method. So as mentioned, on the other side, we have reporting deadlines and requirements, and really comes down to this: all chemical and microbiological results reported by the 10th day following completion of analysis, including QC, unless there's a next business day requirement for that result. So really there's everything that's next business day, and then everything else 10 days. There's no longer a difference between chemical versus micro. 10 days following completion of analysis. We've also added a couple new next business day requirements. So we have our existing list. We've added a couple with this rule revision. First one, detections of microcystins in raw water. Also, all lead and copper results. This has been a requirement since the House bill because that was, signed into law. We've just adopted it with this rule. And then the third one is those seasonal startup total coliform results. Those are all new next business day requirements. As I mentioned, there's a list now, and this list is available on the fact sheet for the rule revisions, also available in the reporting tips document in kind of a different format, but this is really the breakdown of all the next day requirements. We have, positives and repeats of total coliform and E. coli results. Those have been existing, those have been requirements. The new requirement for those seasonal startup TC or EC possibly results. And then these existing MCL requirements, any MCL exceedance or resample to confirm. There's detections of total microcystins in finished water was an existing requirement with the HAB rules in 2016, but now we have detections of microcystins in raw water as a next day requirement. Also in 2016, we had all the genes for qPCR and cyanotoxin genes. Those are all next day requirements, any detections. And then as we'll kind of continue to drum on those lead and copper, all lead and copper TAP results, even non-detects. Okay, every rule has a few exceptions, including our reporting rule. And hopefully this will kind of answer some of the questions out there and hit on those. This is also mentioned in the fact sheet, but MORs for those public water system labs that are reporting MOR data. This requirement for reporting has remained unchanged, so 10 days after the end of each month, not affected by 8908 reporting requirements. Also, water quality parameters, generally for lead and copper rule. Those were updated with the lead and copper rule changes, it's 8190, but they don't fall under the 8908 requirements. The requirement is 10 days after the month when samples are received by the PWS. So those are two kind of groups of data that don't require the 10 days after completion of analysis, now required in 8908. As I mentioned, I'll hit on the subcontract reporting requirements. So I think just the general idea behind this is even if labs are subcontracting samples out, they're still required to meet this 30 business days to complete an analysis. And this includes the final QC by the contract lab. So, you know, this is previously there was really no requirement for this. If you met hold time and method, that was okay. We're really wanting these samples to be processed, even with a subcontract, relatively quickly. So the completed analysis date still falls on that final QC, and that would be the final QC in general by that contract lab, the original receiver of the samples. As kind of should be pretty obvious, these subcontract relationships, the samples still have to meet the hold time in rule or method. As an example, the microcystin, total microcystin has a hold time in rule of 5 days from collection, and that's in the HAB rules. So that should be, and that's from receipt to completed analysis, including QC. So that just has to be, you know, paid attention to during those reports. Let's see. And then kind of last point here on subcontracting, this is in rule that the original receiver of the sample or the contract lab is ultimately responsible for reporting quality and timeliness to Ohio EPA and their client, PWS. The rule allows that the subcontract lab can report on behalf of the contract lab, but that would be whatever agreements worked out between the labs. Ultimately, we're looking for the report from the contract lab. Whoever reports those results will be basically held to that timeliness. If they're late, it's, we're going to be looking at the lab that reported. As mentioned earlier, just kind of a real quick look at a timeline for the reporting, analysis and reporting of sample results. Really the important thing here is that the timeline starts when the sample is received from a client, PWS. Those are from our commercial labs. I would say for our public water system labs, when the lab part or staff within the public water system receives the sample from the sample collector, that's your receipt date, that's when the clock starts. So then that starts the clock on the 30 business days or 60 days for RADS to complete analysis, including QC, unless there's something else in another hold time in method or in rule. And then from that completed analysis, anything that doesn't have a next business day requirement, there's 10 days to report the results to Ohio EPA and the public water system. In general, I'd like to share a couple reporting tips, things that come up, questions we get from labs, and maybe I'll address some of your questions you have today. The first one is a reporting tips document I've mentioned a couple times. I will go out to the web and we'll show you where that's located on the web where you can access that document. We update it. We try to update it at least once a year. as rules change or new information is received, we update that. It's kind of a living document, but it really is our main guidance for labs in regards to reporting to Ohio EPA. It's a requirement for labs, certified labs, to have a reporting SOP in their quality assurance plan. And this is really a valuable document for your lab and your staff, that if somebody's out on vacation or unforeseen absence, that you can fill in another staff member to keep that reporting going. With more frequent reporting because of the shorter deadlines, this is going to be something that's really important for labs, to have multiple people that can report these results out. We'll throw out there that our staff is available and willing to review your chain of custody and your SOPs for reporting. We encourage you to send it to us and let us take a look at it. We'll give you kind of our honest take on what we think could be added, maybe something isn't exactly correct, and we are available. We're available for any questions that come up. We'd rather questions be asked prior to an issue with reporting or with deadlines. We're here, somebody's here 5 days a week from 8:30 to 5 o'clock, so feel free to give us a call with any questions that come up. I would say one of the most important parts of this and the tips is really getting that complete information, accurate information from the PWS client. Now this is really for our commercial laboratories that are receiving samples from public water systems, that you get all that information and really have a thorough chain of custody that addresses all of the information that's required to report. It's, as we'll cover on the web here in a little bit, there's places out available that you can access the information, things like the monitoring schedule and other places online where you can find the information that the water system needs to help them. It is their responsibility to provide the information, but if it's a situation where you can help a client rather than reject the samples, I would think that would be a good idea. And then kind of a quote we have around here is, when in doubt, report it out. And that's really, if you get samples for a public water system, they have identified their OH number, their PWS ID. Really, no matter what the purpose or reason for those samples, they should be reported to us. And we're never going to issue a violation for over-reporting or too much reporting. So just when in doubt, report it out. If it's a public water system, you need to report it. All right, we're going to touch a little bit on EDWR, some tips and kind of common things that happen and how to navigate those. We have any labs that were at our HAB workshop out at Environmental Services a month or two ago. Tyler Liston presented some of the same information, but I think it's valuable. So really the big one is that a problem with one sample within a report can reject the entire submission. If you do get a rejected submission, you can go on EDWR and you'll see this little red X here in the center of the screen, and you can see what caused the submission by clicking on that red X. It'll show you what caused the rejection. Our general process here is that if a submission is rejected, Tyler will send an email to the person that submitted the samples explaining how to fix the issue, and that's if it hasn't been resubmitted. And we'll talk about resubmissions here in just a minute. Really some general common reasons that reports are rejected. There's a requirement, every sample monitoring point is required to be paired correctly with a facility ID code. There's only, one relationship. If we have a treatment plant facility ID, with a lead and copper sample monitoring point ID, that doesn't match up because those are distribution samples. So those facility IDs have to match the sample monitoring point. That can cause it to be rejected. Of course, if there's analysis date before the collection date, that doesn't work either. The sample will be rejected. Invalid method. So maybe there was a incorrect entry of the method, and you can access that method code information on EDWR, but that could be another reason for a rejected sample. Also, invalid PWS ID code. We have 4,500 approximately public water systems in Ohio. If it's not one of those public water system IDs, it'll be rejected. Duplicate sample numbers, you can only use the sample number once in a report. And then an erroneous collection date. So this would be in the event that there was a data entry error, potentially, and the year, generally it's the year that gets entered incorrectly and doesn't make sense, so that'll be rejected as well. A lot of these really come down to data entry problems, and if it gets rejected, it's not the end of the world. We can get it fixed and resubmitted. So how the resubmission process works, basically if you catch it quickly, say around 30 minutes, you notice right away that it got rejected, you can just go ahead and fix the error, resubmit it, but please email Tyler Liston, and that would be a notification to not load the earlier submission. So all the data comes into EDWR. Tyler, about every hour, is loading samples from EDWR into our database here. So if he hasn't done that yet, we can have a second submission put in. But if his submission has already been loaded, you'll have to send an email to Tyler with the sample number and kind of what needs to be changed or corrected, and he'll work on that with you. If he has any questions, he'd call you or maybe email you back. There may be some back and forth there, but it's generally the two scenarios that we see. All right, we're going to touch on the sample monitoring point IDs, hopefully briefly. This is kind of general information, what they are. They're the location, identify a location where a sample is collected. As mentioned earlier, they have to be paired with facility IDs. It's an important relationship. They can identify a specific location or address for distribution system samples. That's like disinfection byproducts, lead and copper. Those two programs basically have sample monitoring point IDs that identify specific addresses. And then we do have multiple areas, as I mentioned earlier, that you can reference these SMP IDs for a public water system. The first place is on their monitoring schedule, which is available on the web. Second place is in the EDWR reference data. And then the third place, which I'll point to here when we get out to the web, is a spreadsheet that's updated periodically that lists all the facility IDs and SMP IDs for public water systems. Excuse me. Now, specifically for lead and copper samples, within the last couple of years, we've begun to build our database on sample monitoring points for lead and copper for public water systems. And basically, these identify those unique locations in the distribution system. We use this coding, it's alphanumeric with LC, generally starting with 201, and then numbers kind of go up from there. They are associated with specific address, or potentially for a smaller public water system, could be just a location within the building. And the key part for lead and copper is that they link up to contact information in our database. In the event that we need to contact a resident about a sample result, we're required to have that information here in-house in our database. So really that it's a really important relationship that the sample's identified by a correct SMP ID, which we can then access contact information in our database to get in touch with that resident if there's a breakdown in communication from the public water system. So these are originally and continually submitted on a spreadsheet by the public water system to Ohio EPA with all that contact information as well as the SMP ID and address. And water systems are encouraged to update these as changes occur. And kind of the key point for the lab is that when new sites are added, they're not replacing the old LC numbers. So if they have an address that a customer no longer wants to participate in lead and copper sampling, they're not to replace that sample site on their LC list. They're just to add it to the bottom of the list. It's really important to maintain the integrity of our data and how those are linked to certain places in the distribution system. So some stuff really specific for labs with these lead and copper sample points. You're going to want to, when the system is submitting samples, you really want to check that chain of custody for those SMP IDs first. It is a requirement that they submit those with the LC numbers. Everybody was required to submit LC SMP IDs, so they should be using those at this point. You're going to want to repeat that SMP ID in the collection address field. So this is I believe it's a required field on the SSR for lead and copper samples. So instead of, repeating the address or writing the address, typing the address like we have before, we now have that data in our database. So really all you need to do is just repeat that SMP ID in that field just to be able to submit the sample result. You can check a PWS's SMP IDs, as I mentioned before. Here's the one place on EDWR under laboratory, and it's the reference data. And the key to this is that, as I mentioned earlier, if a system is wanting to replace a site or add a new site to their list, it's possible that they submitted that list and then immediately collected their samples and submitted them to a lab. The lab may go to report and not have the new sites available yet in EDWR. If that's the case, the lab should immediately report the results, but use a generic SMP ID, DS000, include the address, contact info, and the new LC SMP ID in the comments. This is a way for us to get that data submitted. We're not waiting on stuff to process, but it's simply the new SMP IDs haven't made it through our process and been uploaded into the system. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to go out relatively quickly to the web page or website for Ohio EPA, visit some of these really important information pieces that are available. And so the first one's the DDAGW data reporting page. And just a couple things I want to draw your attention to here. We really brought these 2 points out here as kind of the most important on this page. First is lab reporting tips. I've mentioned, multiple times today, but that's a document that we're continuing to update. Any new staff that's going to be doing reporting, you really should, have this information available to them. I see a lot of labs that have this printed out on the bench top, next to the computer where the reporting is done, what have you. The second really important newer document really covers what we talked about today, and that's the revisions to 8908, Laboratory Analysis and Reporting Rule. So that fact sheet's available there. That's where you'll find that table of all the next business day requirements for reporting. And a bunch of information here. I won't go through everything, but if you scroll down to these tabs here, you can find additional information under forms and instructions. You have your micro and chem SSR, information and instructions. And as I mentioned about accessing a public water system's SMP IDs, right here is a list of PWS state facility codes and associated sample monitoring points. So this is updated periodically. But it is just a snapshot in time. For a real-time look at what SMP IDs we have for a system, that's where you'd access the reference data in EDWR. Something else that would be helpful for labs, if you get a request for, for example, a request from a PWS for what data has been submitted, over the past year or something to Ohio EPA. We're now putting out spreadsheets of all the data, drinking water results, and MOR data that we've received. This is also updated periodically, but I would say if you go to like a previous year, you would get all the data. It comes out as a spreadsheet. You can sort for an individual PWS and provide that. This is a useful tool. We get a lot of requests from researchers and other agencies for data, drinking water data, and we have that all housed in one place now. Okay. So the next page we'll go to is the DDAGW Public Water System page. Also a bunch more information available and really should be familiar to labs working with public water systems. And the big button here is monitoring schedules. So I mentioned earlier that you can access SMP ID information, facility ID information, and also public water system ID, the OH number. That can all be found within the monitoring schedule. So after I click that button, real quick, first off, you have a question about a specific program. There's our trustee folks here in the compliance assurance section that you can contact about specific programs and sample results. But then for the schedules, we'll go down here to the current schedules and pick whatever county the PWS is in. You'll get a PDF. I'll just pull Adams County real quick. PDF of the entire county. A quick Control F will allow you to search for a specific water system. All of their information is here. Now you have your public water system ID, you have your facility ID, you have your SMP ID, and then everything required at that SMP ID following. Really, the public water system should be familiar with this, but if they need a little help, the lab can provide that. Actually, let me go back to that. Additionally, on this page, we have apparent monitoring violations. Many of you may get our listserv, our email messages when we do put out a new apparent monitoring violation list. This is in the event that a system did collect a sample. It was analyzed, but just didn't get reported. We're going to put a list out that says we think these systems are in violation for monitoring, and at that time you can check for your clients and see any samples and get them reported, to keep them, to have them avoid getting a monitoring violation. Okay. We'll just mention quickly the advisory tracker. So this is really for your information. Any current drinking water advisories are available here. Also, real-time data can be found at Drinking Water Watch by clicking here, and that's really up to date pretty much by the hour of what's submitted to Ohio EPA for public water systems. Kind of last couple pages I want to draw your attention to. Some of you on the call today, on the webinar today, may have received our email about the webinar and in general our email messages. If you didn't and you want to sign up, and get continual information from us as things come up, we'd go to this page. And this is really, you know, I'll update information as far as updates from Ohio EPA. If you don't have an account, you just sign up. It's free. And then once you're in here, you can adjust kind of what you receive as far as the subscriptions for Ohio EPA messages. Excuse me. So we have this broken up by program or division in Ohio EPA. Of course, the most important one we'll go to is the Division of Drinking and Groundwaters. And here you have just different information. I believe the information for certified labs submitting public water system data using EDWR. So that's really the most critical one for labs. You may want to sign up for all of them. I believe there's another EDWR, yeah, for public water systems using EDWR. It's our HAB mailing list. This is a bunch of information that you can receive. You can kind of pick and choose what you want to sign up for. The last place I'll take you to is the Ohio EPA YouTube page. You may not have known that we have a YouTube page, but we certainly do. And we've kind of transitioned all of our video type information to one place on YouTube. So this is where the webinar recording after today, it'll be housed out here. Any of our webinars, any type of updates, sometimes webinars aren't live, they're just recorded and put out on the web, and then we'll provide a link. So this is a wealth of information in here. If you prefer to watch videos or listen to the content, you know, you can find that information here. There's some older stuff as well. Press conferences sometimes get up on here, that type of thing. So yeah, you basically go to YouTube and type in Ohio EPA and you'll get that information. With that, we're going to go ahead and go to our question and answer period. First of all, our website here, my email, and I did provide Tyler's email just for some of those EDWR things. And now, just go ahead and get into the questions that we received. Okay. So the first question, can a microlab report results on a monthly basis due to completion of QC at the end of each month, with the reporting to be completed by the 10th of the following month? Will this reporting comply with the revised rule? So, say no. For microbiological analysis, you have to, you know, that would be first by the hold time it's abide by, and then by the 30 business days to completion of analysis, including the QC. But it's not the 10th of the following month. It's 10 days following that completion of the QC or the completion of analysis. Okay, so we had a question about the timeline. So it starts when original contract lab receives sample or when subcontract lab receives sample. So that would be when the original contract lab receives the sample. That starts the timeline. Several customers tell me their district representatives said that we have to have the lead and copper reported by September 30th, even if we don't receive them until the 29th. No, that's incorrect. If you could send me an email with possible, you know, who was sharing that information, that's wrong. the September 30th is just the deadline for collection of lead and copper samples. You still get the 30 business days from receipt and then the 10 days following to submit. So as you indicated, the contract lab is ultimately responsible for reporting. Then mentioned that the lab reporting the data late is the one that will receive the violation. Very common for original contract lab to not supply the PWS data with samples, delaying the reporting. Yeah, so yes, the original contract lab is who, I mean, that's who, basically what it means is that's who your PWS's client is going to be looking at to say, why wasn't this data reported? But really, we have no way. Whoever reports the data is responsible for the timeliness. Whatever you have to work out with your contract lab, that's kind of between the two labs. Anybody else have anything on that?
Pretty much. Accept samples without.
Yeah, and maybe it's a situation where if you're concerned with the accuracy and timeliness of the reporting, that subcontract lab may not want to take on those samples or accept those samples without all the information of, to report. Next question, if the lab fails to enter data in a timely manner, is the NOV issued to the water facility or the lab? So if the lab fails to enter, so basically at that point the water system would get an NOV for mismonitoring because we don't have the samples, and then when we run compliance on late reporting or lab reporting, the lab would also get an NOV for missing the mark on the deadline for reporting.
Would rescind any NOV that the receipt said wait for too.
Right, and for the public water system, we would rescind a violation, and take that violation away if we did find out and we got that information that the sample was collected during the correct time period. Okay, we're going to take just like a 2-minute pause. If you got any final questions, go ahead and get them in, and we'll come back on and finish up in about 2 minutes. All right, seems like we definitely stirred up some more questions. That's great. Next question, can lead and copper results be, oh, I'm sorry, I missed a couple. Let's go up. Our treatment plant completes our own micro samples. We still complete the MOR by the 10th of the following month, but we also have to report each individual sample by 10 days of the result, correct? Plus, where is the reporting form on the e-business center? So for the PWS doing your own micro, you have to, for the microbiological, you have to abide by the 10 days following completion of analysis. You would not re-report those on the MOR. You'd only report them once.
If I can clarify, this is Brian Tarver. The microbiological report years ago was considered an MOR. It's not an MOR. That's actual samples being reported. So your regular plant distribution MOR, that did not change at all. It's the reporting deadline for your micro samples is now no longer necessarily the 10th day of the following month.
Right. And then I'm not sure, he asked, where's the reporting form on the e-business center? And I'm not quite sure what he's referencing there, if it's the SSR that is on the reporting page under forms and instructions where we saw earlier. But if you need additional help, I think Tyler Liston could help you with that. Next question, what if a sample is misreported on time and corrected after the 10-day period? So I think this is if sample is reported to us and it's incorrectly reported as late.
So this is Sarah Starr. I think the question is if you report information incorrectly for a sample result to Ohio EPA, but you report that information on time, what you would want to do is you would want to call Tyler Liston or Brian Tarver first before resubmitting, and then from there we can offer specific guidance on that sample submission, because there are certain things we can correct and certain things that we cannot that would require a resubmission. And if it does require a resubmission and that sample is late, then that definitely would be a late sample valid for receiving a violation.
Next question, thanks Sarah. Next question is, can lead and copper results be posted on the community website, or does each homeowner who provided a sample need to be individually contacted by mail with the results? So no to the website. The consumer notice requirements in the lead and copper rule are specific, needs to be hand delivered if it's above the ALE, and can be sent by mail if it's a non-detect or below the ALE. When in doubt, report is the next question. So for systems that collect extra samples, either for bacteria or DVP, there is no harm in reporting all results. That's correct. There's no harm. Generally, if it's for a public water system, it's, you know, and I would say definitely for those regulated contaminants, yeah, you would submit those as special purpose samples. Next question, do we submit a lead and copper report from individual villages, or does our contract lab continue to report the analysis for us? So it's still required for lead and copper that the laboratory doing the analysis is required to report on behalf of the PWS. Next question, has there been any discussion as far as reporting language that is sent to the consumer that will make it easier to understand what they are looking at? To me, it's like deciphering assembly instructions that were translated from Chinese to English for the cabinet I bought that says some assembly required. Confusing. I agree that there is some public education efforts that are needed as far as reporting drinking water results. You know, not everything above zero is deadly or bad, and those of us involved in the industry understand that. It's not common knowledge for public water system customers. We do have some information for the lead program and the public education part, if there is an ALE that kind of explains lead in drinking water, also part of the consumer notice. but that's something that we're continually working on here, and I appreciate the input. Okay, that was our last question. We're right at under an hour. I'm going to go ahead and just close out. Appreciate everybody tuning in today. Like I said, we will share the slides, a PDF of the slides following the presentation, probably next week sometime, early next week hopefully. And then, yeah, if there's additional questions, you got the email addresses there. Feel free to call the central office here, and we'll address questions individually as they come up. Thanks again. Have a good day.